the surgeon, the nurse, and a third chair reserved for you. Welcome to the third chair.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, welcome back to the third chair. I'm the surgeon.
And I'm the nurse.
I'm so excited that we actually got our first podcast done. It was kind of scary being the first, but um, I was really thankful to see that people actually listened to it. And I really appreciate all the little commentaries that we received online. That was very sweet and nice and very supportive. Um,
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, everyone, for your likes and your support and your views. We really appreciate it, and that's the kind of stuff that encourages us to keep going.
our last episode was, I thought, was pretty insightful, and I feel like we hit on some things that I hadn't even thought before, and we talked about things that we weren't even planning on talking about, and it kind of turned into a little bit of a scientific kind of dissection of um, this whole idea of a victimized role, right? We discussed parenting, some of the shortcomings perhaps, but why it's important not to dwell on those shortcomings and to avoid that victimized role and what the benefit is. And I know that we kind of closed it off by almost like a segue into today's topic, which we'll get into in a second. Um, but I would say that was my summary. What's your thoughts? How did you feel about the last week's episode? Or I'm sorry, not last week, but our last episode. And what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. It definitely forced me to think a bit, and you know, one thing I always remind myself is that understanding our past isn't about collecting evidence against our parents or other people. It's about understanding ourselves well enough that we don't unintentionally pass the same pain onto our children, because that's really what our last episode was about. It was about parenting, and as parents, we're all going to make mistakes. None of us are going to get parenting perfectly right. What I hope my children will remember isn't that I was perfect, but that I love them enough to apologize, learn, and keep growing. You know, Islam teaches us that every human being makes mistakes, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Every son of Adam sins, and the best of those who sin are those who repent." I think that's why this conversation about forgiveness is so important. At some
Yeah.
point,
Oh, I'm
mhm.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I mean, at some point, every one of us is going to need to ask for forgiveness, and every one of us is going to be asked to forgive someone else. So I was just going to say that I think that leads perfectly into something I think is really important to define. When people hear the word forgiveness, they often picture very different things. So, doctor, how would you define forgiveness?
Yeah.
What is it? And
Yeah.
maybe, yeah, what isn't it?
Yeah, but before we get into that, you said something really insightful. I just want to kind of expand on it a little bit. And you're right. Our goal wasn't to blame our parents, right? Because I want you to imagine our kids starting a podcast 20 years from now. And when they do, we're going to be in trouble too. Because, like you said, we've made our mistake, our fair share of mistakes. And we'll probably continue to make our fair share of mistakes. The idea is we want to just talk about these things. And whatever episodes we do in the future, the idea is we're not focusing on just mistakes. It's, hey, this is life, and what can we learn from it? So I'm glad you brought that up. That's actually a really important point that I didn't think about. Um, but to answer your question, what's forgiveness and what isn't forgiveness? It's really tough because I remember thinking back, right, to my experiences and thinking to different things I've seen. um Forgiveness is not a lot of things. It's not pretending that something bad didn't happen, right? It doesn't mean that I'm all of a sudden gonna trust whatever hurt me or whatever that person has hurt me, or that we don't have like certain healthy boundaries, because we want to learn, right, from mistakes and from hurt. But the important thing is to choose to not let whatever that hurt or whatever that resentment is to control you and control your life. Um, and what's really interesting is, like, in talking to my friends, school, all these things, you find there's so many things that tell you about forgiveness is important. Always forgive, always forgive. But what's interesting to me is everyone tells you why, to forgive, but nobody tells you how to do it, right? And that's one of the things that I wanted to hopefully hit on as this conversation progresses. What's forgiveness to you?
Well, first of all, thank you for that that really simple layout of what forgiveness is and isn't. I like that you said how forgiveness isn't pretending that nothing happened, and uh, you know, essentially isn't trusting someone again automatically, and all of those definitions. As nurses, we're taught that healing isn't the absence of injury, it's what happens after the injury. And I think emotional wounds are very similar. Healing doesn't erase the fact that there was an injury. A wound can heal, but you may still have a scar. That scar reminds you what happened, but it doesn't have to keep causing pain. So, one thing I especially want parents to hear is that forgiveness doesn't mean allowing continued abuse or unhealthy behavior around your children. Sometimes loving someone means loving them from a healthy distance as well. So, that sounds really simple in theory, but in reality, forgiveness can be incredibly difficult. From your perspective, doctor, why do you think people struggle with it so much?
So I actually think the reason why people struggle with it is not how, because the concept of forgiving someone is very easy and very simple. And I kind of want to transition this talk away from parenting because I'm really hoping that we can use this forgiveness in all aspects of our lives. And I think the reason why people have so much trouble with it, it's not that the idea of actually just forgiving somebody, it's the why. Why are you forgiving someone? And this is the part that I think is really important. And this is at least for me, when I finally had that little personal aha moment, like, oh, it was when I finally understood and reconciled the idea of this is why I'm forgiving, right? Because we don't always get what we want out of forgiveness, right? Because when someone is angry and somebody's upset, it's very easy to, well, I need, an eye for an eye. I need this, I need that. And when you start to look beyond that and you start to at least do some self introspection as to, well, why should I forgive him? Then all of a sudden, I think it actually becomes easy to forgive, or at least that's my perspective. And it's really interesting, right? Because you get kind of the worldly perspective of forgiveness, you get the psychological perspective of it, and then there's the spiritual or religious perspective of it. You know it's interesting because once hopefully you reach that why, the benefit is just unbelievable. I'm reminded of an old hadith that says, ليس أشد بسورة إنما أشد الذي يملك نفسه عند الغضب. So in other words, forgiveness isn't weakness. The strong person is not the one who overpowers others. It's the one that controls themselves when they're angry. Because you got to remember, when you're angry, because you were hurt, it's very easy to explode, and which actually lets you spiral out of control. It's actually a bad thing. It's a really bad thing. So you're almost like you're doubling the damage that's happened to you, right? So when you're hurt by something or someone or some group of people or whatever, um, it really can lead you to an ugly, unnecessary spiral. And when you hopefully learn to control yourself, I think you could do really well. But I don't want to over philosophize it. I guess is that the word? uh, like before I get into it too much, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear, like, how do you deal with it? Like, in taking the parenting aspect out of it, just like the worldly aspect of it, right? Because there's so many things that we deal with from day to day, whether it's paying too much at the gas station, right, for a gallon of gas, or groceries, or look at. I'm sure you heard in the news, people are getting sick from eating, contaminated lettuce. I mean, it's just so many things, right, that happen. Like, how do you deal with it?
Well, I think, like you were saying earlier, as to why, I think it's important to first understand why that forgiveness is so difficult. Um, and before we get into how we deal with it, um, I think one thing we don't talk about enough is how our identity can become attached to our pain. Uh, if I've spent 20 years thinking of myself as the person who was hurt, forgiveness can feel like losing a part of who I am. But healing isn't forgetting your story. It's refusing to let your worst experience become your entire identity. And I think that is what we're going to discuss, how to deal with it. um, and in Islam, as Muslims, one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names is al-adl, the most just. That's comforting because it reminds us that justice doesn't disappear simply because we've chosen forgiveness. So sometimes forgiveness is easier when I stop believing that justice depends entirely on me. And so I think that brings us to something really interesting, which is the some of the science behind forgiveness. And I'd like
But
to.
yeah, before we get into the science, you said something actually really, really cool. I never thought about it. So that was beautiful how you transitioned into that. So because you're right. Another way to put what you just said is we have to kind of let go of what we cannot control, right? Because I think that's the problem. I think that's where like anxiety even comes from, right? People that get very anxious, one of the things that we try to teach them is, hey, you got to let go of the things you cannot control, and there's a lot of different steps you can take to get somebody to understand that and learn that. So it's kind of cool that you came up, you understand that, and you're able to infer that just from one of the Asma al Husna. That's actually it's actually really beautiful and very insightful, and it's really, the reason why something like that is so interesting to me is, so like growing up. With mom and dad being like very Egyptian, it's funny, like sometimes I would hear them say like really silly Egyptian idioms, right, that almost oversimplify things, and it's kind of funny, like, or you hear it in movies and you think to yourself, you're like, huh, you're like, can life really be that simple? Like sometimes it's actually infuriating. Like one of like the silliest Egyptian sayings, I don't know if you ever heard it, it's illifat mat. Have you ever heard that before?
No, I think that's the first time I've heard that one.
Yeah,
Please
yeah,
elaborate.
yeah, it's it's such an old, silly Egyptian saying, "Lefat mat," which just basically means what's past is dead. So like it's kind of like, there's no point in overthinking the past, right? Because nothing good comes out of it. But it's just so interesting, like because it, whether you realize it or not, part of that kind of gets beat into as almost as an identity, right? And one of the things that I think is so funny about the Egyptian culture is sometimes they solve very complicated psychological things in something so simple. Like look at this, Lefet Mat, 3 words, right? Um, and it almost like completely erases a lot of the things that we talked about, like why is it so difficult to forgive? Literally like erase it. They didn't even to get into pride, wanting justice, waiting for the apology, right? All those things that we seem to kind of go over and over and over. But sorry, I just had to throw that in there. I just thought of it when you were saying it because that was very insightful. Um, Good job, Reem.
Well, thank you. I learned from the best. I learned from my big brother. Um, but
Let me
yeah,
ask you this before we get into the medicine of it. Give me an example of something that maybe we could use before we get into the medicine of it. Maybe like a simple example, a simple hurt, or a simple thing, and how to let it go. Um, the only reason why I bring it up is like I didn't even know we were going to do this episode today, and we're going to do it on forgiveness. And I was talking to our brother, one of our brothers, and he's so upset yesterday because he told me that he went to Friday prayer, and I guess he left his sunglasses inside his shoes when he took it off, and when he came out, the sunglasses were gone, right? And they had disappeared, and he was pretty upset about it, right? And it's so funny, like at that moment, like how do you soothe somebody, when they're upset with that? And there's kind of like the Egyptian identity, right, in me that says, "Khirha bghirha." That's another funny Egyptian saying. Have you heard that one before?
no, I have not. I love that you're full of them, though.
Yeah. Or there's another, like in other words, like there'll be khair or like goodness and something else, right? Or you could say, "Khadet sharraha wa rahat." Do you remember that one, or have you heard that one before?
No, I have not.
Yeah, like it took some shudder, it took some evil, and it went away. Like another, like an Egyptian, like the idiom is basically the idea is that something else bad could have happened, and at least that happened, and at least it's gone. Like people will say that a lot. Like if you break a mug, you spill something on yourself, or you dent your car or something, but like, hey, be thankful. It could have been, an American idiom would be like it could have been worse, right? But there they look at it like, oh, it was a trade off for something else that could have been worse. So like that's part of me. Part of me is like it's kind of funny because the saying almost automatically implies a lot of what we're trying to develop, right? All these depth and why are we doing it? Which goes back to why I think it's so important because the how is almost like easy, right? Just let it go. But I think to really let something go, you need that why. So before we get into the medicine of it, I'd love to hear like an example of something and how maybe you would deal with it.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny. I actually I spoke to that Muslim brother yesterday about that recent incident, and I guess that really ties into the overall way that I like to look at things, and it's that sometimes blessings. There's blessings behind forgiveness, and there's blessings behind those really annoying things that happen. And, so I told him, hey, maybe the person that took your sunglasses, maybe they really, really needed them.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, you forgive them. And maybe that is a sadaqah, that is a charity, that, you'll have your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, you know, there's that. And I'm reminded of actually a recent example myself. If we're talking about the blessings also behind forgiveness. Uh, Last night, my 6-year-old made, I was sitting down in bed ready to read him a story, and then I proceeded to turn my head to the left and noticed that there was a big 1-inch hole in the wall, went all the way through the wall, on top of drawings and whatnot. And on the other side of that wall is our room, but it's two. There's two walls. So, but on the other side is our room. And I actually, uh, I'm not proud of it, but I reacted right away. It was something I never ever thought I would ever see, and I just said, "What did you do?" And I called my husband up and I said, I need you to come up here. I don't know how to deal with this. And and I did. I felt upset inside. And when my husband stepped in, the first thing he did was that he laughed. And his laughter made me turn my face away so that my son wouldn't see me laugh, because I thought, oh, he's not going to learn his lesson if he sees us laugh. And then I mean, just every single thing that my husband did just took me back further to go from dealing with to just observing. And it was really an amazing blessing that I witnessed, amazing parenting. And so basically, he said, and I know you wanted to step away from parenting, but it's just a recent example.
Hmm.
And he looked at my son and he said, "Whoa, how did you do that?" Like, he was so curious, like, how it wasn't, it wasn't, what did you do to the wall? It was, how did you do that? And they just began having this conversation between one another, to where my 6-year-old was showing him the tools. I didn't even look at these tools. He actually came up with these amazing tools. He had a way to cut the hole. He had this like cup with water and like this hard stick straw that he was using to like clean it out. And my husband was just commenting and saying, "You are going to be a builder when you grow up. This is brilliant. This is brilliant." So then he proceeded to ask him, "Tell me, why, what were you trying to accomplish here? Why were you doing that?" And then my son said, "Well, I wanted to make a way for you guys to check on me from your room." And my husband said, "Wow, that is really sweet of you. That is," and my heart just slowly started to kind of humble itself and feel kind of embarrassed over my reaction. And I still, as a reaction, was like, "Well, now we're gonna have to hire a professional." And thank God my husband said, "No, no, 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 we got this, we got this." So then he asked him, "Well, I mean, why didn't you try to hide it? Like, why is it there? Like, if you're gonna do something." And then my son responded with, "Well, I didn't want to hide it. I wanted to show you this really cool thing that I did." And it became into the biggest blessing. And my husband and him then just talked about the walls and the construction of it. And they even got into, "Well, if you really want to accomplish that, we're going to have to get a saw, and we're going to have to do this, and we have to," and then they talked about the safety and electrical wires in the wall. And and they had this amazing conversation, and it was just such a huge blessing. And I personally went to my 6-year-old and told him, "Hey, I'm so sorry. Like, I I really hope that you can forgive me. I didn't mean to react that way, and I had no idea the reason why you did that, and I didn't take the time to appreciate the steps that you took to accomplish making this whole." And he was like, "That's okay." And I'm grateful because my husband came in and protected a really important developmental stage in my son, which at this age, it's their autonomy. The if anyone remembers Erickson's stages, autonomy versus guilt and shame, and
Hmm.
he protected that. And so it was just an overall blessing. Like, we learned how to forgive. We protected his upbringing, and it taught me a lot. So you know um
Yeah, that's beautiful story. Beautiful
and
story. And it literally summarized everything that we tried to hit on in last episode and in this episode. It allowed for a way for you guys to grow and not focus and not let anger control you, right? And take over the situation and rob you, right? Rob you from something beautiful, an opportunity for you to bond with your child, an opportunity to teach your child right from wrong, an opportunity to allow the child to realize, oh, I do have a skill that can grow and become something powerful. So, I mean, I couldn't have thought of a more beautiful example to put that all together. And it's the opposite of kind of that whole idea we talked about, victimizing and that rumination that can happen, right? When you play events over and over again. Like, how many times have you heard people say, they're angry, or even ourselves, right? You'll be angry about something and you'll play the argument in your head in the shower, and You can almost hear like, you know, you're winning the argument, they're losing the argument, this and that. And then you come to realize while I was doing all that, that person probably didn't even know that I was alive and they're sleeping comfortably. Um, and you lose yourself in that moment. You lose yourself in that moment of anger. And from a medical perspective, since you start to bring it up, the medical perspective, that's not healthy. And we need to realize that, and we need to be in control of that. The brain has an alarm system. That alarm system that got activated in your story is called the amygdala. That part of the brain, the amygdala, is going to release some stress hormones, whether it's adrenaline or cortisol, which are going to cause your heart rate to go up, your blood pressure will go up, your blood sugar might go up. It might even make you more alert, goes towards your muscles. You start to get anxious, and that's not healthy, right? That isn't healthy. That's really bad. It's a way to protect you if you think about it from a physiological perspective. I mean, imagine if you're out in the desert and something is chasing you, or if you're in the jungle and a lion is chasing you, you want that kind of response, right? So that you could save yourself. But you know what's crazy is that same response gets activated whether a lion is running after you, or it's your mother yelling at you about something, or it's you remembering that your mother what something that your mother told you back in 2002, and you're replaying it in your head. And that's kind of crazy, isn't it? That it's literally the same response, which leads to bad things eventually, right? It leads to uh, chronic elevated cortisol levels, bad blood sugar control, bad sleep, a bad immune system, poor relationships with people around you, which in itself has its own psychological problems. And your nervous system, your body doesn't deserve that. It doesn't deserve to be put through that. Um, I mean, and like you brought it up several times, a religious perspective that, you know, Allah tells us to forgive, not because Allah needs us to forgive. Allah doesn't need anything from us, right? God doesn't need anything from us. But perhaps He tells us that because He knows that it's better for us. Um, I don't know. Beautiful story.
Thank you so much. It was a beautiful experience. It was truly like rounding in the hospital as a nurse and getting a rare experience to witness, an emergency C-section with resuscitation of the newborn. It's something that a lot of nursing students, they don't get to experience that beforehand, and it was just it was a beautiful experience, and it brought us all closer together, and we all learned from it. And
Hmm.
it turned out that I was wrong, not my 6-year-old for making it was me that was wrong.
Well, I
And
wouldn't say
yeah,
you were wrong. I mean, you were upset because some a piece of property got damaged, right? And he could have hurt himself. Not including forget that. Yes, it's going to cost you money. You got to fix it, this and that and the other thing. But I'm not trying to belittle the way you felt. It's just that instead of being angry, you use that opportunity, or and your husband helped you
my husband
obviously with
agreed.
it, to learn from it so that both you could benefit and the child can benefit and he can benefit, right? So, which is good. I mean, you when you let go, all of a sudden you feel calmer, you're less anxious, your stress levels are lower, which allows you to build a better relationship. In this case, it was with your son, right? It was, well, it's three-way between you, your son, and your husband. You feel actually more energetic. You're emotionally more energetic. It allows you to go to sleep, later at night. These are all huge concepts that help you psychologically and physiologically. Right? These are very important things. You
I,
know,
I couldn't even think. I couldn't even think.
yeah, yeah, you're right. Because when that amygdala kicks in and all that stuff goes in, imagine it's like you driving a car and you got one foot all the way down on the gas and one foot all the way down on the brake. Well, eventually something's going to wear out, right? And that's actually the same thing with chronic resentment, which is why it's important not necessarily how to forgive, but understand why you need to forgive. So you gave a beautiful example, but I guess some may say, well, that's a on a scale of big things that could happen. Well, how do you forgive really big bad things that can happen in the world? How do people that are driving and get hit by a car and get injured, or they have a family member die, how do they forgive that other person so they can move on? um I mean, these are real life situations that happen, unfortunately, to a lot of people. You know, the mother that loses a child at a young age. Like, I mean, these are all things that are difficult that you need to that people need to learn how to deal with. And we may not have the answer in today's show, but what I can tell you is it's important to understand the why. Why am I doing this? You know, where was I wronged? Was my time stolen? Did I lose money? Did I, what are the things where I was wrong? You need to identify those things and you need to label them so that you can let them go. Because if you just try to let go of something and forgive just emptily without understanding it, um, sometimes you don't get that reconciliation. It doesn't happen. And then next thing you know, 2 weeks later, that same topic, that same person, that same thing comes up, and you find yourself wincing and upset again. Um, but if you can try to understand what made you angry, whatever that situation is, I think it makes it a lot easier for you to reconcile those feelings and then truly move on, you know, and truly accept that. At least that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then you don't get to miss out on an opportunity to turn something that you may perceive as a disaster into something that can be really beautiful and cause growth and you know, and cause us to learn about one another and our strengths and our weaknesses and all of these things. So yeah, and as you said, yeah, also in nursing, we also see what chronic stress does to the body with the poor sleep, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, the constant muscle tension.
Mhm.
So, as you said, yeah, holding on to resentment keeps our bodies, not just our minds, our bodies too, in a state of chronic stress. And the person, meanwhile, as you were talking about your example, ruminating in the shower while, you know, and just going crazy, while the person who hurt us may have already moved on years ago,
Mhm.
while our body and our mind continues to carry the burden. And, you know, again, um, uh, sorry to tie it back in, but, you know, children, and not just children, but younger siblings, other people that may look up to you, they are incredible observers. People are incredible observers, but especially children. And if they hear us constantly, for example, you know, criticizing a grandparent or another family member or a friend or a person, unfortunately, they begin learning resentment before they ever understand forgiveness. So it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we hide the truth from them.
Oh, you're right,
It
because they don't learn by what we say. They learn by what we do. You're absolutely right.
Right. It means, yeah, we teach, yeah, exactly. Monkey see, monkey do. You know, it means, sorry, that's my son. It means we teach honesty without teaching hatred.
Mhm.
So, you know, doctor, if someone listening is thinking, because I just love your expert advice, I love your expert breakdowns, and you totally answered my question from the previous podcast regarding rumination and anger and PTSD and how that ties in. So, what if someone is asking you, okay, I want to forgive, but I have no idea where to start? What would you tell them? And I know that you answered part of that previously
Mhm.
when you said acknowledge uh, what made you angry or acknowledge what happened honestly. But please continue on with that because I think that's really important. We're not taught these things.
Yeah. Okay. So I have again, these are personal philosophies on how I like to approach these things. And they may not just only hit on the concept of forgiveness, but again, I already said it, but I want to repeat this part because I really think it's important. Um, People ask the wrong question. It's not how do I forgive, it's why do I forgive. And when you understand why you need to forgive, I think it makes it a lot easier. And it's a lot better for you for your mental health as a whole. And unfortunately, mental health is so stigmatized in society. People don't really like to talk about it or, reflect on it or try to understand it. But so we hit on several points as to why we should forgive, right? And number one, you have to identify what exactly wronged you. You really need to sit down and understand, okay, why am I angry? What is it that I'm angry about? And even if you take out a piece of paper and a pen, write it down. I'm angry because I lost money. I was stolen. This got stolen from me. They insulted me in front of these people. I lost a job opportunity. Whatever it is, just write them all down. Okay. That's I think step number one is you got to really recognize why you are upset and why you're angry. And the second thing is you need to accept. I think that's really important. Is sometimes forgiveness can't happen right away, right? We're always taught you have to forgive, but you have to forgive yourself if you can't forgive right away. It's human nature to sometimes be angry, especially if the wrong is really big. And I think that's important, right? Because if you force yourself to kind of, especially when the wrong is really big, to fake forgive, sometimes that can actually backfire on you. So, and sometimes the reason why we can't forgive right away is maybe we don't understand really why we're hurt and why that thing that happened upset us or made us so angry. And it goes back to the whole idea of, unfortunately, I personally think the reason why that happens is people like to play the victimized role. Um, it's inherently built in our neurochemical system. And we need to realize that and understand it. And when you do, I think that's going to help control your emotions and you're going to get a better control of how you can hopefully kind of stay on top of the agenda and hopefully achieve that level of that forgiveness. Once you do those things and once you finally understand why I'm hurt, I think it's a lot easier to realize, well, a lot of these things are out of my control, going back to what you said. And I'm upset because I lost his job because he called me this and he lied about this and he lied about that. From a faith perspective, when you realize that this comes from God, right? And those things will come to you eventually. So whatever it is, you need to kind of sit down and realize that some things are out of your control. And when you do that, you're going to be able to let it go. So that's one. To simplify it. That's I think a really important point why people have trouble forgiving and moving on. The other part of it is I think that unfortunately, um, people don't take care of themselves the way they should, and it's unfortunately a result of just life and society and the stresses of the dunya and the stresses of the world and the things we have to deal with. And I kind of have this little, I call them the 10 S's of life. Um, and I don't know if this is the episode to share them or not. If you want me to, I'm happy to go through them and we can maybe like expand on them on other podcast episodes. You tell me.
Oh, I always love to hear from you. Please.
Okay, so I mean, they're kind of, I don't know. The letter S has always resonated with me. Like I remember even telling like my residents on the floor, like when you take out a drain, remember the S's are suture. You got to cut the suture. Suction. You got to relieve the suction and slow, pull it out slow. So I don't know why S always resonates with me, but I think one of them. I know it's gonna sound silly. The first one is sleep. People don't sleep. You need an appropriate amount of sleep. Not too much, not too little, but you do need sleep. And when people are stressed, what do? You don't sleep, which kind of creates a vicious cycle and makes things worse. It's important to know when your body needs that break. The other one is sunlight. Sunlight is important, as you know, as a nurse, right? We're taught you don't get enough sunlight, depression kicks in. Sayyidina Muhammad SAW, there's a hadith that said that, and whenever he walked out of his house, what's the first thing he did? He would always look at the sky and he would
Mm.
feel an immediate serene calm. And then you think about it, you're like, subhanAllah. I mean, especially if you look at it from a scientific perspective, it actually makes sense. Getting that sunlight exposure, it's incredible. The relief and just seeing nature, it's like a wired in thing for us. The next one is squats. Um, there's good medical evidence now that shows the size of your calves, okay, um, is correlated to the incidence of dementia and cortical atrophy. So the smaller your calves are, the more likely you are to develop dementia and things later in life. which is why it's so important to make sure your squats are good. Exercise them. Do your squats so your calves can stay strong. Strength training. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be much. Once, twice a week, go out and do some lifting. If you do that, it's crazy how that can actually help you. Supplements. Take whatever supplements you need, whether it's vitamin B12, vitamin D, and you can talk to your doctor about that. But even a multivitamin is really good enough. The next one is really important, especially if you're an introvert, is socialization. Because loneliness, there's medical evidence to show when people are lonely, their brain shrinks. So it's important not to be lonely. Try to, and it's easier said than done, right? But try your best to do any kind of socialization. Even it's like, you know what, I'm gonna put on my schedule, and this is one of the things that we teach in cognitive behavioral therapy. Call somebody, Monday at 2 p.m. that person. Like for me, I have a routine of people I call to try to maintain relationships, but it's also healthy for me. Like every Friday after prayer, when I have my son with me in the car, we always call his aunt. These socializations are important, and I try to teach it to my kids indirectly through little activities like that. The other one is skill set. It doesn't matter if you're good at it or not. Just pick any skill set and try to develop it. Learn a new language, do a puzzle, whatever you can think of. Anything that causes your brain to struggle. Even if you don't find the solution, it's okay. It's almost like an exercise for the brain, which is, really important. It really is important. Um, the other one is savor. Savor the good moments. It's so easy for us to reminisce on all the bad things instead of reminiscing on the good things. Like the moment you just had with your son. What a beautiful story. You should remember that and think about that later. For some of us, it's the day we got married. For some of us, it's the day we got into, nursing school, medical school, whatever it is. Reminisce on those good moments because it'll cause you to be somebody that has gratitude, and gratitude is so important. That's why we're taught to always say Alhamdulillah, right? If something bad happens, Alhamdulillah. If something good happens, Alhamdulillah. You don't know what this thing is, Alhamdulillah, right? There's a hadith, right, where the Prophet said that one of the most amazing things about the mu'min is that he always says Alhamdulillah. Everything is good to the mu'min. It doesn't matter, good, bad, it doesn't matter. You always say Alhamdulillah. And that gratitude, it's crazy. It helps the brain. The other one is stress, which we just talked about, which is why it's so important to forgive because you want to avoid stress as much as you can. It's healthy to have a little bit of stress, but too much of it, especially when it becomes chronic, clear evidence that shows that your brain will shrink. There's MRIs, CAT scans that show chronic stress causes your brain to shrink. And the last one is stillness or salah for me. So you want to use, some people use stillness, to meditate, to just literally disconnect from the world, let your body reset. For me, it's salah. Use salah to pray. For other people of other faiths, use stillness, just quiet, yoga, meditate, whatever it is that helps you. Um, and I don't know. Those are my at least the things I've been able to come up with over the years.
Hold on now, doctor. You said there were 10 S's of life. I think I only heard 9, unless I missed one. We got sleep, sunlight, squats, supplements,
Well,
socialization.
strength training, remember? So
Oh,
that,
strength training was
yeah.
one. Okay. Wow. I love this list. And I think, is there any way that we can put a link and maybe with a PDF with these 10 S's from our podcast? Because I never knew that. My calves are so skinny. I need to get to squatting. That's that's
Maybe what I should do on my next khutbah is talk about these. I don't know, and find correlations on them. We'll
I
see.
think that would make a great khutbah lecture, Friday lecture for our listeners that don't know. Um, I think that would make an amazing lecture for Friday prayer. I learned so much from this list. I definitely will need that PDF document. And for all of our listeners as well, this is a beautiful list. I mean, it it makes me ask myself, I mean, what am I hoping will happen before I'm willing to forgive? Am I waiting for an apology? And am I waiting for recognition? That dopamine reward system you were talking about with self-victimization.
Mhm.
Am I waiting for justice? Uh, I mean, if that day never comes, am I willing to let my own healing wait forever? There's no excuse, especially with this amazing list of 10 S's. We can start this today. We can start any one of these things right now. This is beautiful. I really appreciate that list. I've never heard such an amazing list of things
Oh,
that we
well,
can do because.
you're being too
Mhm.
sweet, I think.
No, not at all. I mean, this is about self care, like you were talking about. When we start taking care of ourselves, I think that will help us heal, and it will help us grow and strengthen our. I mean, this is awesome. I really love this list, and I do think our readers are going to need, our listeners, I mean, are going to need a link to that list. So, I mean, come on, every single day we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. Imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave us the same way we forgive other people.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's one of the since I started giving these sermons, these khutbas, that's something that I really want to teach people, and I have a really a longer khutbah that I break up into three, where to kind of summarize it, I try to tell people, look, at least in our deen, Asma al Husna, right, the 99 names that we have for God, are really important to understand because they really are a characteristics for us to try to emulate as much as we can in our lives. And it's crazy when you do. The happiest people you'll meet in your life are the people that try to understand and embody those values, right? Um, and it's really important. And I'm not trying to make this talk overly religious. It's not the purpose really, but it is part of my persona, right? So I have it has to come up, but it's really important to understand that forgiveness is important. Yes, it absolutely is. We're trying to show you, like, from the human perspective, why it's important, at least from our limited medical knowledge, why it's important. But like you said, it is very important. And like you said, it says it in the Quran, right? Let them pardon and overlook. Would you not want Allah to forgive you? In Surah An-Nur, right? So, like, it's so important.
Yeah,
Um,
I was actually looking at that verse
yeah.
before this
I
podcast.
don't
I
have it.
love
I
it.
don't have it
Really.
memorized, but I think it's واليعفو يسفعوا على تحب ألا تحبون أن يغفر الله لكم, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's so important. It really is so important.
Wallahu ghafurun rahim.
Yeah, in Allah
And
Ghafurur Rahim.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is off forgiving. He's most merciful. And, and it reminds me that mercy is something we hope to receive. So it's also something that we should strive to give, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Doctor. Did you have something to add to
No,
that?
no, no, not at all. I mean, I completely agree with you, and I can't believe we've already been talking for almost an hour. I'm looking forward to our next episode next week. I think hopefully it'll be a fun one where we're lucky, we're gonna be joined by our cousin, actually, who's a medical student in Egypt, and it'll be really interesting to get her insight on. I'm hoping to be an extension from this topic on, can someone truly change? So we'll kind of let that sit with our listeners, and hopefully we can broach that topic on our next podcast.
Yeah, and one thing I keep coming back to is that forgiveness isn't about saying the hurt didn't matter. It's about deciding that bitterness won't have the final word in our lives. It really is a gift, not because someone else earned it, but
Mhm.
because we deserve the peace that comes from letting go. So, as you said, I agree. Forgiveness naturally leads to another question. If someone has hurt us, can they truly change? How do we know when change is genuine and when we're simply hoping for something that isn't there? I think that is the perfect conversation for our next episode. Thank you very much. You have been listening to The Third Chair with the surgeon and the nurse. We hope you join us next time.
Thank you. Bye.